Hi, and welcome back to the channel. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that we're living in quite extraordinary times. And my sense with all of this is that as we find ourselves in these extraordinary times, we are called forward to share and investigate and explore the extraordinary. And this channel is really kind of a homage to the astonishing, the possibility of astonishment, the possibility of us stepping into a realm, a way of being, a way of moving through life that evokes and constantly replenishes that possibility of astonishment and wonder. Now, really the whole ethos of what I'm sharing here is how do we live in this world, in what seems to be this kind of crazy world where there's so many things coming at us, there's so many things that seem to be opposing us, standing in a way, so many obstacles, so many challenges. How do we meet that? How do we flow through that with power, with wisdom, with creativity? And how do we, as we move through this, thing called time, how do we become better, more enhanced, more invigorated, more vital, more useful in terms of our ability to contribute? How do we do that? And that's what we're really about here. It's not about whether you can put this face cream on or whether you can take this particular technique that everybody else is using. What I really want to get into is the utter extraordinary. And in a way, this is very fitting for my incarnation in this reality. In a way, I've always been kind of a magnet and an attraction and a contributor to this sense of wonder and mystery and creativity and, like I said, astonishment. Even from an early age, I can remember being in Italy with my parents, and I've always kind of attracted unusual experiences, unusual people. And when I say people, maybe even people not necessarily resident full-time in this dimension. So just one particular thing of many was once when I was a small child. I was probably about maybe 7 or 8, and my parents we were in Rome in Italy, and we were walking around a district, very beautiful district of Rome. And my dad at the time was particularly feeling agitated, and he had quite an interesting relationship with his own country, with Italy. He'd had a very tumultuous upbringing and carried a lot of baggage. There was a lot of rocks inside him from his time that he spent growing up in Italy. And this was post-war Italy, so it was not an easy time. So on this particular occasion, we were walking around this district, and somehow at the corner of my eye, I caught like a woman that I thought there was lots of women selling kind of herbs that would come up to you, maybe gypsy women or traveler types that would come up to you and offer you these little things of lavender or something that were wrapped in like tin foil, and they would want a donation for them or something like that. So at the corner of my eye, I assumed that that's what this woman was. And my parents were walking on, and I think my uncle and auntie and my cousins were there as well. Everyone was kind of walking around. We were just out strolling, and we were going to a restaurant, and we were going to get something to eat. And I was kind of lagging behind, and I went over to this woman. And, you know, of course, all the things they tell you not to do, don't talk to strangers and all of that kind of thing. And what I say, well, it's fine to talk to them, just don't go off with them. But I was just out of that particular sphere of attention of the family. And I just went over to this woman, and she handed me, she was quite interesting looking. And I remember being quite struck by the fact that her eyes seemed very green and not kind of like a normal pair of eyes to me. But I was just a child. So as children do, we kind of accept things because we haven't been so far away from being in the realm of wonder and light and spirit. So we're not so far removed from that reality that we can still relate to it. We can still relate to the sense of the miraculous and the magical. And the woman gave me what I thought, I can remember thinking, oh, it's going to be the herbs or something like that. And she actually gave me a St. Christopher, a silver St. Christopher. And she just put it in my hand, and I didn't know what to do really. So I turned away. I thought, I wasn't sure whether to give it back to her or what to do. So I remember turning away and then carrying on walking with my family, and I kept looking back and I couldn't see her. And I remember getting to a restaurant where we were all going to eat, and my uncle ushered us in, and he was kind of like a big character in Rome, a property developer and kind of a larger than life character. And he tended not to have to pay in restaurants. So, we were all kind of invited in and sat down. And I remember just kind of the thought came into my head again. I'd almost like just put that to one side, that I'd been given this St. Christopher. I think it's the patron saint of travel. And I remember showing it to my dad, and he almost fainted. He almost fell off the back of his chair when I gave him this thing. I mean, his reaction was like, oh, where did you get this? What? And he was very clear that this St. Christopher was what he'd lost when he was a child. And he remembers being really distraught about losing it. And it was just so out of the realm of possibility of what he was expecting that it really shook him. And I remember him going out of the restaurant and walking around and then coming back and questioning me. And I didn't really quite know how to describe what had happened. I just told him that someone had given it to me, this woman had given it to me. And so that was just one incident. And, my parents started to get used to things like this kind of happening, unusual things. And even just the fact that I was very clear that I could see energies and things going on. And, there was another time when I had another uncle, Uncle Mario. And Uncle Mario was quite a character. He was, he wasn't a real uncle. He was a friend of my dad's. But he was a very lovely character and always smiling and very upbeat character. And I remember we were in a park where there was a cafe. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it was in London. I'm kind of slightly mixed up as to the actual location. It may have been London, or it could have possibly even been Brighton. So I don't know. It doesn't matter if you're not from the UK. London might mean something to you. Brighton may not. But anyway, it was a park and there was a cafe where they sold ice creams and coffees and stuff like that. And I remember sort of just playing around, and like this energy seemed to come out from a tree. And the energy said to me, go and tell Mario not to eat the peach. And then it sort of kind of vanished. And I was like, what? Again, I was just a child, and I was like, oh, I wonder. I was a little bit bemused again by this kind of this happening. And the energy was almost like a person, but not quite. It seemed like it was the tree. And again, I kind of accepted it. It seemed kind of natural, but not natural, as if wasn't quite sure what to make of it. But, you know, in that childlike energy, there was a sense that, oh, this is just kind of what happens, and we can see these things. And no one had actually talked me out of the fact that these things are not real or possible. So I remember thinking, well, shall I go and tell Uncle Mario not to eat a peach? I wasn't even sure that he was going to eat a peach. And, you know, my dad was off getting ice creams and whatever. And instead, I decided to go and tell my mum that this had happened, and, you know, not to tell our Uncle Mario not to eat a peach. And whilst all of this was going on, we heard this, like literally this gagging, this really horrible sound. And it turns out that Uncle Mario was eating a peach, and he'd gone to sneeze, and he'd breathed in the peach stone into his. He got down to the stone, and he'd literally had it in his mouth, and he'd literally breathed it back into his throat. And my dad rushed over, dropped all the ice creams, rushed over and bashed him on the back, and out came the peach stone. So it was things like this that kind of guided me to the fact that there was like a reality beyond what we accept as normal reality, and that this reality is kind of, there's a possibility of being in a kind of dynamic relationship with it, that it can tell us stuff, that we have this sense of what is guiding us or giving us message. There's a dynamic communication between these things. And in a way, like I said, coming to the fact that in extraordinary times, we can come back to this. And I find myself increasingly coming back to that sense of childlike wonder, and once again delving into the unusualness, the mystery of reality, and bringing back the gifts that it has to give. And another incident that really connects into what I'm doing here with the Trinity, which was very interesting at the time, maybe even interesting now, is that when my wife and I were traveling through India, we were staying at a place called Varanasi, which it was kind of like where the town of the dead, as if it were, where people want to go and die in Varanasi so they can be put on the funeral piles and cremated. It's a very sacred place. And whilst we were there, lots of very unusual things took place in that particular time that we were there. And I'll go through some of them in a later video, but it's not necessarily relevant to this one. What is relevant to this one is that I again encountered someone there that I now believe was a kind of a shaman or a teacher that could travel between different dimensions. And if you're listening to this and you think, my goodness, he's completely lost the plot, then I'd ask you to just think again and ask yourself that, what do you know is true? What can you say for sure is true? And once we're open to the possibility of the extraordinariness of reality, the extraordinariness of life, then we become open, we become ripe, we become primed for extraordinary things to meet us along the way and help us and to guide us. Now, of course, there are other energies that are not in our best interest, but there's a way of orientating yourself in reality whereby those realities are literally pushed away from you. It's a sense of divine protection within you, that you're moving constantly towards the highest possibility, and you're open to sharing the things that you've learned to help people live a better life, a more enriching life. So in this particular incident, there was this shaman or energy master that I encountered, and he was very young. I mean, he looked like he was in his 20s. But what was very interesting about this particular person was that I met him maybe twice when I was out on my walk around and travels in that particular part of India. He wasn't Indian. He really looked, maybe he could be European, maybe even Italian, maybe Spanish, had a slightly indistinguishable accent, which sounded continental. Now, I remember that he was talking to me about the ability to levitate, and we got into this conversation about levitation. And I was fascinated by the whole thing. And I was someone who, you know, if you told me that there was a pig with wings flying in the sky, I'd go out and take a look. I wouldn't say, oh no, that's not possible. I'd go and take a look. Now, he was talking about this possibility of levitating. And at one stage, he showed me something that really got my attention. And he pressed his fingers against a wall. We were near a cafe. And by the way, just to, before anybody says anything, I hadn't been taking anything at all. I was actually on a spiritual practice back then, and this particular phase, I wasn't taking any kind of drugs, nothing at all. So this is not kind of a drug-fueled or psychedelic-fueled encounter. Now, this particular person, he pressed his fingers just against a wall, the side of where this sort of cafe area was, and just lifted himself off the ground. And I remember me looking at it and thinking, like, you know, this was kind of before David Blaine and all of this kind of thing. This was way before all of that. So I had no reference point for someone just going in the street and doing these kind of things. So, you know, I said to him, well, what is the process behind you being able to do that? And he was saying to me that, you know, life, reality is constantly renewing itself. It's constantly replenishing itself. And using our minds, we have the capacity to kind of get into the minutiae, the detail of things, and just bring that energy to life in a different way, in a sense, to open things up so more energy could flow through and be used and become available. And this fascinated me. And he then explained several ways that you kind of foster this way of doing things. You foster this way of bringing this energy to life, more energy to life. And I remember after these encounters, I spent days and days and days and days and days and days trying to fathom out this thing of levitation. And I remember sitting in meditation. I remember kind of thinking through the things that he told me about, you know, moving our consciousness into a particular frequency and being able to then, you know, literally make ourselves light, to bring more and more light into our being. So we become light, literally. We're not heavy, we become light. And it's possible to just use the most minimum of effort to make something happen, to lift ourselves, to move ourselves. So he was very much describing this idea of effortless action, effortless movement. And I do talk about this in my book, The Guiding Principle, which I found a copy of this that I didn't even know I had, actually. I've always been like showing the old version of it, but this is kind of something that's actually going to be back in print, funnily enough, in the coming weeks. I had to take it down because it had so many pirate copies that Amazon and these different things actually were emailing me saying that, by the way, your own book is overpriced. I was like, what? So anyway, there'll be an updated version of this in the weeks to come, which this book actually details a lot of these kind of unusual experiences that led to kind of ways of seeing reality, ways of understanding things, ways of healing ourselves, ways of bringing ourselves to a point of enhancement where we can do things that on the surface don't seem possible for ourselves, no matter where we are with things. That for some people, not think something that's not possible might just be running a mile. For another person, it may be running 100 miles. For another person, it may be levitating. For another person, it may be enhancing their eyesight. For another person, it may be healing their teeth, their hearing. It may be having a connection or a conversation. It may be many, many different things. But what this is really about is the ability to bring to life something that wouldn't have happened under normal circumstances. Anyway, back to the levitation story. Now, after days and days and days, we travelled on, and we ended up in Goa. And we thought, we're going to go to Goa, and we were kind of on a wind down from our travels and stuff like that. And we thought, this it'll be a good place. It's kind of where we can chill out. There's lots of parties and stuff like that. And again, this was no way is this fueled by any substances or anything like that. I was still in this practice. We'd been seeing many spiritual masters and gurus and stuff like that, and we'd practiced different forms of yoga and meditation and all of these types of things. So, I was at this stage. It didn't mean that in prior ways I hadn't indulged, but on this particular occasion I wasn't. And we were invited to a party. And it was one of those parties. It was an amazing party, like out in the middle of this sort of area with this beautiful, unusual building and DJs and all kinds of things, incredible decorations, sort of glowing lights and all kinds of stuff. And I remember like being there and just kind of the atmosphere, just soaking up the atmosphere. People were dancing. There was all kinds of different things going on. Kind of juggling fire, the fire poi and stuff like that. Pretty much like something that you'd see in a film. Anyway, at some point in that evening, I got this urge to just do what I'd seen that guy in Varanasi do, to kind of just think about myself, bringing this light energy into more and more light. And kind of connecting to that inner radiance. There's an inner radiance that sits in all of us. This is who we are, basically, a radiance of being. And I had a real sense to just fully connect with that and to bring that sense of lightness into being for me. And I remember I walked over to where there was this I don't know why there was this kind of significance of just touching this bit of wall or something, but that's what he'd done. And I kind of thought to myself, in a way, I'd felt I'd sort of received a transmission from him on some level about how this should be done. So it wasn't like I had all of the details worked out. It was almost like it wasn't something to work out. It was something to be transmitted. It was something to be communicated, but not on the level of our, the limited scope of language. It went beyond that. And I remember going over to where this little bit of a wall was. And it was like, I remember touching it. And I remember feeling this sense of lightness. And I remember it was almost just very quick. But I remember just kind of floating up for just seconds and then going back down again. And the people around me, there was like loads of people around me. And I remember like their faces were just like, wow, what just happened? What's going on? And I'm pretty sure they were probably on lots of different things. So in some ways it kind of all blended in, and then the moment passed, and one or two people sort of followed me and were questioning me, and then that kind of blended in, and they drifted off, and kind of I got this sense it was like a little bit of a communication, or something had clicked into place where I understood how this thing works and how to activate this whole sense of bringing this light out and using it to do things. And then, funnily enough, the next day, I got another opportunity to use this sense of the radiance, the light, and this transmission to do different things. Now, you know, you could say these are just tricks, like in ancient times, I think they're called siddhis. They're kind of powers that the adepts get when they're kind of a byproduct of all of the sense of meditation and all of this connection to oneness. They're sort of like a byproduct. So in the guy who wrote the autobiography of a yogi, Paramahamsa Yogananda, if that's how you pronounce it, a bit of a tongue twister there. I remember reading that in the 1920s, he used to go in America, he would go on stage and he would get two doctors up on stage, and one doctor would feel one pulse on one arm and one on the other, and just take the pulse, and then he would say, okay, now I'm going to change that, and he would have one pulse going, one, thumping seriously fast in that hand, and that one almost, another one almost stopped. So he would demonstrate what these siddhis, or these seemingly magical abilities, which all of them say are actually, they're just kind of like, they're just things that arise. They're not significant to who we are. However, they do play a role in the fact that when you are given access to these, they give you a sense of enhancement and connection. And it means that you can put things right. You can heal things. You can help other people heal things. It's just a way of using energy. It's all about energy. And I remember the next day I was actually chopping a melon, and I literally chopped a great lump across my finger. And I thought to myself immediately, I just gripped it and I brought this sense of light down into that part of my hand, and it was pouring with blood. It was just blood absolutely everywhere. And I remember just keep thinking about this light and channeling this light into that part of my finger. And, it took a while, and the bleeding stopped, and then I bound it up. And then I just kept doing that, kept bringing this sense of light and channeling it down into that finger. And lo and behold, like 2 days later, I mean, it really was quite a cut. 2 days later, it was completely healed. I had nothing there, completely against what you would think would be possible. And even what I was thinking would be possible, I thought I was just going to have to deal with that for maybe possibly weeks, because it was right that bit where everything you touch just presses on that point. So really what I'm about here, and what I'm offering here, and what I'm giving you the opportunity to experiment with, is the fact that you have an incredible capacity already inbuilt in you to do extraordinary things, to bring things to bear, bring this energy to bear on areas of your body, areas of your being, areas of your creativity. Now, creativity seems to be very interlinked. The creative spirit seems to be very key to this whole thing actually working. And the connection between art, what we would call art, what we call creativity, and this energy, this sense of radiance, this sense of illumination, this sense of consciousness coming into light form and being able to do things and enhance our being. Now, really what we're looking at here is the sense that every time you go to a certain level, so for example, if you are able to relax into your life and allow this principle to come through, this radiance, this energy to come through, one of the things that you will notice is that you start to see energies. Now, it sounds like almost like a cliche, like the Kirlian photography, that you see energies. And what you'll discover is that there are energies everywhere. Everything is energy. And you start to be able to see this, literally. But it's not like normal eyesight seeing. It's like a seeing beyond seeing. It's like seeing without seeing. So it registers as seeing, but it comes from somewhere else. It's almost difficult to describe, but once that faculty is literally activated within you, it's like everywhere you look, you see this, you understand it, it communicates with you, it gives you information, and it helps you. And again, what I talk about is this idea of the signature code, that, you know, nature communicates to us the things that are good and not good. It's a natural process. And in our culture, we've lost this. Now, no amount of AI and no amount of data and no amount of all of these other things are going to bring that to us. I can guarantee that. And really, we're sitting with this consciousness, this organic form that consciousness manifests through. And this in and of itself is the most extraordinary, miraculous process happening. Now, our ability to really engage with this fully and wholeheartedly and magically is linked to our creativity, our ability to create, our creative spirit. So, as I've said in other videos, I was once told by a very beautiful shamanka, when I asked her what is the purpose of life, she said, to keep your creative spirit alive. And now I would add to that, it's actually to bring your creative spirit more to life. Now, just after you watch this video, for the next few days, I'm going to invite you to do something. I'm going to invite you to experiment with this. I'm going to invite you to just spend a few moments every day to just close your eyes and sense that within you, within your being, there is a radiance. And this radiance is always there. It's always present. And when you start to touch this radiance and you start to connect with it, you realize that actually it is something fundamental. It is fundamentally what you are. And the more you connect with it, it's like you become interested in it and it becomes interested in you. It's a very amazing kind of relationship starts to happen. And you'll find that you can use this and bring it more to life. The more you notice it, the more you sense it's always there. And actually, it's just your natural state of being. It's nothing special in inverted commas. It's your natural state of being. There is this presence of a kind of radiance. Now, it's not even light like when you switch the light on to go to the bathroom or the living room or whatever. It's a kind of radiance, again, like a seeing without seeing, but it's absolutely present in a way that normal physical things aren't necessarily present. So just connect in with this sense of yourself to locate what it's like to be you. And I don't mean like the persona, the personality, just the raw essence of being. Now, you can do this and you're able to do it. Everyone's able to do it. We've just been talked out of it over time. Now, if you do this for the next several days, what you'll discover is the turbulence in your life, this sense of the mind always in turmoil, always searching for something, always trying to reach and grab something or push something away. What you'll notice, as actually Michael Singer says, that, you know, all of these rocks that have been stored within us, these old experiences where we've been let down, where something hasn't worked out, where things haven't gone the way we wanted. The regrets, the fears, the anxieties are like rocks in the flow of our being, in like the river of our being, and create turbulence. The rapids, they create turbulence. And this radiance will slowly, literally start to lever these rocks up and allow them to be washed away out of your being. And you will sense this, you will have this sense of lightness that starts to come about. And you kind of realize that all of the struggle and all of the holding on and all of that is what makes us grow old. It's what deteriorates us. It makes us decrepit. It makes us unavailable for the full force or presence, power of life. And the more we can allow those rocks to be washed away downstream, the more that flow of light and radiance comes into us. It's already in us. The more it flows, the more easy it flows, and the less turbulence in our mind, because we know that no matter what happens, we're connected to something that is really wondrous. And we're able to verify that for ourselves. So just over the next few days, just go to that sense of being, and what you'll notice is, I can't even tell you how to do it. This isn't how to do it, by the way. Just locate this sense of being, that you are being. And what you will notice is that that is a kind of radiance. And you might never have seen it before, or you might never have noticed it. It's always there. So just practice that over the next few days. And then what we're going to be talking about is how we can expand on these very different ways of approaching reality, different ways of approaching how we, like I said, how we move through life and respond to life, and how we can use that to rejuvenate, regenerate, bring ourselves to life, fully to life. So we engage in the world in a very exuberant, wondrous way. That life opens up before us and invites us to live fully expressed, creatively expressed. We discover that our creativity begins to flourish in unexpected ways. And even people that I've worked with around this tell me that, oh, I'm not creative. Suddenly there's a sense of creativity. I remember a while back, someone even became an artist that had no sense of wanting to become an artist before. Suddenly all this creativity just started to flow out, and it was wonderful. So just do that for now. This is not complicated. It doesn't need to be complicated. And then we'll go into more detail about how these other capacities are brought into being once you're connected to that sense of being, that sense of radiance, and how you can use that to bring yourself more alive, to bring more of life, more of the energy of life to bear on your life and the life of the people around you, everyone you come into connection with, contact with. So until the next video, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you back here soon.